And my name is Candace Powell-Kynard. I am in the leadership of Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable. We meet monthly, usually the third Thursday of the month, and we're excited. This has actually been something that we've been looking to host and talk about, and our connection to Nicole Smith and the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce is really, really exciting. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to become familiar with their work, if you've popped onto their website, but there's some very, very good information, excellent, and we're excited about what she has to bring to us today. The session will also, after Nicole is finished, the session will also include announcements after her presentation. So we always provide an opportunity for our network to announce what they have going on. So if you have activities, events, things that you'd like to share, we give you a couple of minutes to share that at the end. So I want you to tee up your information, and I wanted to invite you to do that toward the end of the presentation. All right, without further ado, I actually do have one thing, and Nicole will share also how she wants to handle questions, but we do have a pretty sizable group, and so right now we're going to encourage you to put your questions and comments in the chat. We have a number of our PCPR team monitoring the chat and monitoring the room so that you have an opportunity to get your question forwarded to the group. All right, now without further ado, we bring you Nicole Smith from Chief Economist with the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce. Did I get that right, Nicole? All right, so you are free to unmute yourself. And thank you so much.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's really, really a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak to you about some of the work that we do at the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. We are a team of economists that work at the nexus between education and workforce outcomes. And it might seem so logical that, education is connected to workforce, but I assure you, when we started working 20 years ago, and I'm just going to go back a little bit, when we started working 20 years ago on this, it was always difficult, especially for educators, to have a conversation about education in the workforce, mostly because, they would think that we aren't necessarily preparing people for a workforce, we're preparing people for life. And to make that connection minimizes the value of education, because education is so much more than getting a job. But, we know that one of the most important aspects of education has been getting a job. And we spend a lot of time at the center speaking about that. And as an economist, I tend to spend time as well looking at the value, the financial value and financial rewards of college. Now, one of the questions that was raised early on, and I'm going to, start my slideshow from the beginning. One of the questions that was raised early on is college worth it? And the reason this question keeps coming up is because it's no longer a definitive yes. It's no longer a definitive yes. Is college worth it? It's worth it for most. And it's worth it for the majority of people who have the wherewithal to go complete their degrees, to make sure that they pick a degree that's in demand, to make sure that they select something that, is going to give them opportunity in the workforce, to get a job in the workforce, to pick something that's going to allow them to maneuver themselves in career lattices and ladders to move forward. But not everyone has that opportunity. And we found at the center that there's nothing worse than that actually not completing a degree can sometimes be worse than starting a degree and and not studying a degree at all. And the reason is, if you start your degree and you don't complete, you still have the student loans. And you still have to repay those loans. And you don't get the benefit of the degree that puts you in the job that allows you to repay those student loans. So we're really careful about talking about what's necessary. But the first chart here talks about cognitive competencies. And you know what, one of the underlying reasons why college matters and why college seems to matter more is because the way in which the world of work has changed. We economists like to call it skills bias technological change. The work itself has become very much skill biased, where leadership skills, problem solving skills, teamwork skills, business and economics, mathematics and computer science have increased in its value, have increased in its demand throughout jobs. And what we have here is a sort of a layout of the land. We take all the jobs in the economy and we look at the competencies associated with those jobs using the ONET database that the Employment and Training Administration creates. And then we can say something about how these skills have changed. And what's interesting is that the cognitive competencies, those things you learn in a college setting, have continued to increase, whereas the physical skills, the motor skills, the vision and hearing, and those jobs that require those types of skills have declined. So we see a movement away from brawn towards brain. So there's so much more post-secondary education and training required for those jobs. And this is why college matters. We have this chart that shows the distribution of education requirements for jobs from 1983. We compare it to 2021, and we have a forecast for 2031. So this is a report that's going to be forthcoming from our center within the next 2 months. And this, if you look at nothing else, you should look at the blue part of the chart, because the blue part of the chart tells you a little bit about demand for bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees in our jobs. And in 1983, we had 11% bachelor's degree, 8% graduate degree. And if you move forward to 2021, that 11 moved to 23% and the 8 moved to 12%. So we have a much higher percentage of our jobs requiring more and more post-secondary education and training in order to complete those jobs. And the future just promises more of the same. So we have more of those jobs requiring post-secondary education and training, and the way to do it is college prep. Here we have a distribution of what those jobs look like by occupations, even within occupations. Education, STEM, community, managerial, and healthcare should come as no surprise. Those jobs should have very significant proportions of blue, right? We expect those jobs to require BAs to do those jobs. But what is also surprising to most is that even in the traditional skills trades and blue collar jobs, we have significant proportions of those requiring bachelor's degree and above. So sales and office, 38%, specialized sales, depending on what you're selling, specialized types of machinery. A lot of those people come in there with bachelor's degrees, even some food and personal services, the managers in those, healthcare support managers in those, and blue collar occupations where they're engineers in there. There's lots of jobs that are requiring more and more post-secondary education and training. So this is just a breakdown of the broad occupational categories by education. And this still tells you that we're going to need more and more education, more and more post-secondary moving forward. The process, though, the pipeline is dismal. The pipeline over the last few years has been flat and falling, and enrollment has fallen. And when you ask people what's going on with enrollment, you sort of blame it on COVID, but that's happened long before COVID. The decline in enrollment was happening long before COVID. And the decline in enrollment has many facets, to explaining it. It's a combination of the increasing cost of college, the exorbitant fees that students are required to pay, how difficult it is to repay student loans, the mere fact that some student loans have become so overwhelming. There are good jobs that are available for many people when they start their career, so that they are foregoing college now before starting a good job. So it's not just COVID, but we do know that people who choose to forego college early on are worse off in the long run. And we want to make sure that we always provide that information so that they know this. We do have a problem with respect to where people go, and this is contributing to outcomes and sometimes poor outcomes for people of color. We have, for example, when you look at the most selective colleges and universities, the first year and second year enrollment, so the new change in marginal enrollment in the most selective schools are still predominantly white. And the open access schools, the two-year colleges, are predominantly Black and Hispanic. And there's nothing wrong with these schools, but they are less resourced than the most selective schools. They have less resources, they have less access in most cases to resources, I guess, that will help you complete, less access to additional training, less access to internships, less access to money, to just money to assist you with that. So once you see the number of Black and Hispanic students overwhelmingly going to open access schools, you also notice that the long run employment opportunities differ for these students. So we're very, very much concerned about where the growth is and where the movement is and where people are going. In fact, we've talked about this selection, this self-selecting into, sometimes low performing schools. And we're concerned that our students are more than likely going to those schools, mostly because of marketing. A lot of schools, the for-profits are marketing to them really well, telling them they can get a degree in a certain amount of time, but what they don't tell them is what that degree can do for them later on. We have a few reports, and I encourage you at any point to go to our website, CEW, Center on Education and Workforce, cew.georgetown.edu. And the reason I'm encouraging you is that we have all of these reports that talk to and speak specifically to going to college or not, and what are the consequences. And this is our most recent report that we published this, last week. It talks about different pathways and the extent to which your life outcomes change depending on the pathways you select. In this particular thought experiment, we ask ourselves, using longitudinal data, suppose you choose not to pursue a bachelor's degree by age 22. And then later on, you enter a BA program, or you earn a bachelor's degree by 26. What are your outcomes? So that's the first part of the chart. Pathway 2 shows if you know post-secondary enrollment by 22, but then you have a certificate or an associate's degree by 22, and then you earn that associate's or a bachelor's degree by 26. What are your prospects? And then finally, in pathway combination 3, you work in a low pay occupation. So you don't even try to go. You start off in a low pay occupation. You work in a STEM or high pay occupation by 22, and then your pathway continuous employment from 20 to 22. So it should be really clear from this picture. Even if you work, especially in pathway 3, you continue to work and you work in STEM and you have continuous employment, your prospects for earnings and wages are much lower than those who go to post-secondary and attain an associate's degree, and those who go to post-secondary and attain a bachelor's degree. And we talk about age 26, mostly because it's a remnant of the data. They're collecting the data on the youth in America. It's a national longitudinal survey of youth. So we do have information for young. And this is why we picked the magic number of 26. But this is a very, very compelling a chart that tells you, hey, even if you don't start, you start later on, you still have an opportunity to get back on track compared to those who just continue with continuous employment over the long run. I wanted to point out some of the reports that might be most useful for you. The previous chart was taken from What Works. So that's 10 educational pathways that lead to good jobs. So we talk about good jobs, and these are jobs that pay $38,000 for entry level and 45 if you're a particular age, by age 40. So we have these definitions of good jobs with benefits. I think it's also important for us to look at ROI, the return on investment, because in this particular report to the right, the dark blue report, there is a fine-tooth comb looking at individual institutions and talking about their returns on investment, looking at the extent to which, students who come out of these institutions are earning enough money to pay back their student loans, looking to the extent to which those monies that they earn compare favorably with how much it costs them to go to school, and actually lining up the schools. And this is something that other institutions are really wary of doing because they want to, rock anybody's boat, but we're lining them up. It's up to you now to tell us we're wrong and we've misrepresented in some way, but we're lining it up based on all the information we have, which ones are doing well, which ones aren't. So I would suggest that we go in here. We have data that's available. They call it scorecard data that's available here that you could actually pick and see which schools are doing well and which aren't. We spend a lot of time working on our reports on returns to investment. And then we have two more reports that might be of use or of value to your teams. It's the uncertain pathway from youth to a good job. So we talk about limits to education affordability, work-based learning, career counseling might impede progress. So we want to make sure that people have appropriate counseling at particular nodes in their transition towards a good job. Make sure that they have work-based learning, access to high quality internship and externship programs, and to make sure that at every point they're supporting in those goals. But it's not always the same for everyone. And as much as we like to pretend that it's the same, it's not. So we talk about how racial and gender bias might impede those goals, that progress towards a good job, and what we can do to make sure that people are not continuously disadvantaged because of their gender, because of being female, or because they are an underrepresented minority group, that they don't have as much opportunity as others. So we do talk about that in these reports. I encourage you to look at it in your spare time. We are cew.georgetown.edu. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Wow.
Thank you, Nicole. That's a
Wow.
lot.
That's a lot of information. So I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment, but I'm going to throw one out as a proud HBCU graduate.
I see one question here. What was the term I used in the beginning? Is it skill-based or skills-biased? It's skills-biased technological change. So technological change in the way jobs are defined that is biased towards higher skills. And that skills-biased technological change is what leads to increased requirements for skills for jobs, and usually requires people to present their certificates, certifications, and their evidence that they can actually do these jobs. One person I noticed asked about what is an open access school that really has to do with schools that have minimal requirements post-secondary to get in. So they're usually some community colleges that you don't have to take an entrance exam in order to do that. It's just a matter of going in, fulfilling your bachelor's degree requirement, and picking a type of program that you want.
There is
see
another
someone-
question,
Mhm.
Nicole. What
Oh,
do
I'm
you
actually looking at the questions as well.
okay, there,
I have
Janelle.
them open.
Yeah, Janelle had a question. What do you believe is the reason why more employers are requiring 4-year degrees?
So there's a little bit of a caveat to this. Philadelphia, well, Pennsylvania as a state, Maryland as a state, followed by Maryland. Well, it started by Maryland, followed by Pennsylvania, and I think Utah as well are 3 of the states that have removed the bachelor's degree as the minimum requirement for some types of state jobs. So Janelle's question, what is the reason why more employers are requiring 4-year degrees? In general, more employers are requiring 4-year degrees because the degrees themselves act as an indicator for the skills that they think you bring to those jobs. So we call, there's the sheepskin. It's just an indicator, the best indicator that we have these particular skills and competencies. And it's developed over time where, more and more jobs are requiring more skills. The best example I love to give is of an auto mechanic, where, an auto mechanic in the 1980s, which is my best memory of looking at my brothers and fathers working in the shop, was very mechanical in nature, right? They can go in, I always remember lifting up the hood, doing stuff with the battery pole. That's the limit of my knowledge here. But an auto mechanic today needs to connect that car to a computer to tell them what the codes mean. So we have the very same category of job requiring more and more understanding, more and more knowledge in order to be successful in that job. So over time, jobs are using technology differently. And I'm hoping that eventually we're going to get some conversation today about AI and ChatGPT, because that's really getting everybody nervous. We know that technology has replaced many mechanical jobs, many jobs requiring brawn. We saw it in automation in agriculture. But the whole notion that technology might replace white collar jobs is very scary. And it's something that we're talking about, and our perspective at the center is that it's not necessarily going to replace those jobs, but we're going to use that technology in a way that your knowledge of how to use it puts you in an advantageous position. So you're going to be much more of a complementary position rather than being substituted.
Nicole, in fact, Phoenix did address AI, not in the same context that you put it in, but she did ask, is there any research going on now about how AI will impact the results of this research and or types of degrees and training needed for a good job?
Yeah, so we have a lot of research going on. And you know what? Someone's asking this question, Phoenix. Phoenix, it's sad to say your guess is probably as good as mine. I mean, I would have details and information that's based on historical trends, but the way in which AI is progressing, and the very example is ChatGPT, the way that's progressing now in a geometric fashion is probably much faster than any of us can predict. Will it decrease? Will it replace us entirely? The answer is no, and it's really funny. There was an interview a few months ago when ChatGPT was first released, and they asked the computer, which jobs do you think you will replace? So they asked him, And ChatGPT replied, well, I think I'll replace jobs that are repetitive in nature. I think I will replace jobs that require translation, where it's easy to translate. I think I would replace jobs where the cognitive skills are low. So the computer was actually able to deduce that. But here's the problem with AI. And for those of you who are movie buffs, and you remember that movie with Will Smith with AI, you almost see it in the movie as well. There is a lack of sensory perception. And when you give them, I mean, they can write essays, you know, they're writing stories and short stories and books for kids, but there's a lack of sometimes understanding. And that perception and that sort of humanness that's just missing. And they can give you an answer that appears to be correct, but is absolutely incorrect. And it's only if you're a human you can understand that, oh, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So there's still a huge gap between that sensory nature, that perception, just understanding that high level critical analysis that a human can bring. They have not yet been able to replicate that. And when you ask the computer, when you ask ChatGPT, that's the one thing he says, you're like, I don't know how to replicate that yet, but I'm trying. I don't know if you've tried it, but some universities have actually banned it to make sure that students aren't using it to answer their homework questions. So they're banning it from their laptops and making sure they don't have access.
I was fascinated by the professor that put their own research in to see what would come out, and then, you know, the other software that finds, you know, whether there's plagiarism. And so, yeah, he was found to
It's
have
harder to
plagiarized.
find it now because everything is unique, is being uniquely created
Right.
by the program. Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got lots of questions flowing. I don't know if you're seeing
I'm seeing some. So I think I see some that ask about, and I will say whether or not we should only be measuring benefits from a financial perspective, and whether we should talk about engagement, volunteering, voting, health status, and all of the additional non-pecuniary benefits of education. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's much more difficult to measure. So as an economist, we spend time measuring things that are measurable. But absolutely, it's important. In fact, we have a report specifically that tries to measure it. So we have, we look at the health status before, and we compare it to the health status post higher ed, and we deduce what, you know, is some sort of monetary value to that, like how much you save in your healthcare costs as a result of being more proactive in healthcare. So we do have a report at the center which looks at the non-economic benefits of higher ed, and of course it exceeds the economic and monetary benefits.
There's another
help me with some of the other
question
questions?
underneath,
Mhm.
looking at the report on your site that addresses ROIs for low-income students. Most of the schools listed are Ivies and prestigious institutions that seem unlikely to admit students from low-performing public schools. How do we reconcile that gap?
So if I understand the question, it seems as if the schools are Ivy League schools that are much less likely to admit low-income students. Is that the question?
It says for students from low-performing public schools, because what the study shows, it addresses the ROIs for low-income students, but that those ROIs are coming from Ivy League schools. So how do you address the fact that a lot more of those schools are unlikely to admit students from low-performing public schools?
Well, mean, that's just a remnant of the data. That's nothing that we can actually address. I mean, we look at the schools themselves, and we know that, you know, Ivy League schools are much less likely to admit low-income students. They have percentages. In fact, I mean, I'm at Georgetown. We've been looking at the percentages by socioeconomic status and family income, and you know, almost appalled at the percentages. And you know, there's lots of information that demonstrates that we can do better. But one of the things that we've maintained throughout this discussion is that the high performing schools often have more resources. So they have individuals who can help you read your essays, who can help you make sure that your grammar is correct, that can provide you with training and bring you up to speed if you are missing, you know, little parts of your education for your mathematics background. There's so many more resources that you have in some of these high resource schools, I should say, instead of more selective schools. And my concern is that there are high performing students from low income backgrounds who don't go to those schools because they don't even apply. And they are much more suited to a high resource school, yet they still go to the open access schools. And we had estimated a number, I think it was 500,000 students who performed exceptionally well in the top 90 percentile of the SATs and did not, either did two things, either did not go to college or did not go to a selective college.
Okay, trying to move down the list because there are a lot of deep questions here. Samantha said, looking at the report on your site that addresses, I'm sorry, let me move away from that. That's the one I just asked. Janine asked, we know these conversations are often cyclical, but why do you think the college worth conversation is suddenly in the public consciousness right now?
Because we're doing well. We have a good economy. So we have a good economy. The unemployment rate is still at an all-time low. Every single month we have record numbers of jobs. When you the first Friday of the month, you have the Bureau of Labor Statistics telling you how many jobs were created. So people have options, they have alternatives. And when you have options and alternatives, you can go to school. Anybody can you know, irrespective of your background and training, employers are at a disadvantage. So they are at their wits' end to make sure that they get access to people and that they're able to keep and train people. So they're doing things to ensure that they do so. In fact, it's our opinion that some of the movement we saw in Pennsylvania and Maryland is as a result of the shortages of workers. Labor force participation is really low, and they don't have enough workers to do the jobs. We have more jobs than there are employers. At the end of the day, the market is good. People are going to say, well, I don't need college because I can get a job. It's cyclical, as someone said. I think you were reading the question.
Yeah.
And it's cyclical. So the moment that market turns, an employer starts shaking it out and saying, okay, I want to make sure I don't have to do this anymore. I don't have to pay for your education. I don't have to sort of get you. I don't have to do your fees. The people who suffer the most are those without the sheepskin.
Barbara Madelman asked, the first slide you shared showed skills gained while in college. What about students who are only taking online classes? Do you have any data or thoughts about this, how this has impacted their careers?
So we don't distinguish between the degrees, whether those degrees were obtained online or in person. And that's a good question. I mean, there's one perspective that, you know, the reason we're seeing such a decline in enrollment is that students are scarred from COVID and having had to, spend so many years online in this really, difficult environment, very, very isolated environment. And that a lot of them are not necessarily interested in school, if that's the type of school that they engage in. But we do not have a way, from at least from NCS data, National Center on Education Statistics, on distinguishing between which of these degrees were online and which weren't, and whether one is better than the other.
Okay. The next question I'm seeing is from Lincoln. How would you navigate the accusation of meritocracy into our discussion on college application, especially when we acknowledge that selective colleges and universities possess more resources for students?
So I think meritocracy is a farce. my whole opinion on this, because there's so many students who get into those colleges based on their legacy. Yes, we want to make sure that students with the best grades get in, but I've seen some students take the SAT 35 times, and 35 times, by the 35th time, I'm thinking that you will get a better grade, because they don't record the improvement. So by the 35th time, I think you're going to get, a full grade. So a lot of the meritocracy that we see, in my opinion, is so highly correlated with socioeconomic status that it's a farce. I mean, the meritocracy, we talk about, let's just all, we pick, the only thing we're going to pick is what your SAT scores are. But these students have private tutors, right? And I cannot, it's really difficult to compare a student with a private tutor who's taken the SATs multiple times to a student who is working a second job, writing the SAT for the first time, getting the money together and still doing almost as good as you. That tells me that that student is demonstrating a lot of the types of behaviors that we expect for you to be successful in college. And you want to give that student as well a fighting chance, and not only focus on, college grades that are so highly correlated with socioeconomic status. We know that a lot of our most selective colleges and universities are doing away with SATs now as an entry requirement, and focusing more on the holistic person development. Who are you? What have you done for the last 15 years?
Tom asked, what has the reception been from the higher ed community to CEW's research and finding?
Great question. I love that question. Higher ed has been mixed, because higher ed, we sort of hit it on the head. We hit it on the head even at Georgetown. We are critical even for Georgetown University. So when we say, here are a few things we say. We say that post-secondary education is required, but not necessarily a bachelor's degree. And if you have to get an associate's degree as a stepping stone, or some sort of post-secondary certification, then go ahead and do that as a stepping stone towards the bachelor's degree. So that often makes higher ed a little uncomfortable. We say that not all of the degrees matter. We talk about some degrees that don't necessarily lead you to a direct, clear-cut occupation. And we think that higher ed should be much more open about which ones they are, because they know which ones they are. They know which ones, take a longer time for you to find yourself. A lot of people don't have enough time to find themselves if they're paying back that student loan. So, but those people in higher ed who want to know about which certificates, which certifications, which degrees, which colleges and universities, they take us very favorably. And even when we talk about it from a monetary perspective, we have our non-pecuniary report that demonstrates, look, there's healthcare benefits, there's a civic responsibility, there's all of these additional things, even incarceration rates are down. We have all of these additional things that point to the true value of college degrees.
Okay, moving down the list. This was an interesting question to me. What can we learn from other nations doing this better? Are other countries looking at the same metrics in the same way, for example? Is their secondary education working better, or do their universities fall more into the high resources per student category?
Well, there's a few places that are doing it better. A few of them in Europe. I mean, I like some of the Latin American countries that make tertiary education free, that are highly subsidizing tertiary education and making sure that everyone who is interested in college gets an opportunity. We had a conversation about this with this administration prior to election, and it's been thrown out the water because, you know, everyone, oh, you can't have free college because, you know, all these poor people are going to get free stuff. But free college is so much more about leveling the playing field and giving everyone an opportunity to achieve this American dream that we always talk about. When I think about, you know, countries that are doing better, everyone loves to highlight Finland, right? Like, we have this really great story in Finland, the way they respect their degrees and the way in which they reward teachers salaries that are comparable to engineers and others. But that's the way the entire society is structured. And Finland also does not have as much diversity as we do in the United States. So it makes it a little bit, you know, a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison to say, well, okay, we should be more like Finland, you know, in this regard. It's a little bit different. But I think what we need to recognize is support. European countries are very big on support, providing supports even for working moms, so that you know, they don't have to worry about childcare and providing childcare while they're enrolled or while they're working. This is extremely important to engineering success for our students.
Nick asked, when you had mentioned that state employers are moving away from requiring bachelor's degrees, are there other sectors, major employers, leading in skills-based hiring as well?
Yes, and one of the biggest sectors of that is actually in tech and healthcare. So you know, you can have certifications in tech. I love talking about the MCSE, you know, certifications. Those are the types of locations where you don't necessarily need a degree in computer science. I mean, it takes you 4 years to get your bachelor's in computer science. Very often the field is moving so quickly that by the time you graduate, we have 5 or 6 other things that are, you know, are now in demand. So a lot of the people in those fields are working simultaneously, getting their certification. Tech field is one of the biggest example, I think, of where you are getting employment without necessarily the bachelor's degree, but it is post-secondary because you have to do those certifications, maybe at a community college, maybe online.
There are also, because my son is a technology person, sometimes the agencies that people work through in tech have their own universities, and they provide certifications in various things. So to your point, it is post-secondary, but it's not necessarily your traditional college or university or even community college setting. Candace said, you know, we're hearing also about the heightened student loan conversation is driving the college is worth it conversation. You have any thoughts on that, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, student loans are exceptionally high. They're I mean, if you look at the growth of student loans over the past 15 years, you'll be as appalled as I am. It's grown at a geometric pace, and that is a function of the number of people who are in it, who are, engaging in student loans, and who are in college. So it's a combination of things. But I think when you look under the layers of student loans, what's interesting to me is who's shouldering the burden of the loans. And 60% of student loans are still held by women. And that's because the majority of women are in college, and women are also pursuing degrees in the intellectual and caring professions, much more so, that don't necessarily pay as well as some of the other STEM and tech degrees, and put them in a disadvantageous position when it comes to getting graduate degrees and paying back student loans. So this is why we see, if you look at the $1.7 trillion, 60% of that's held by women. It is also disproportionately held by African Americans and Hispanic students, who are taking out larger amounts of loans and are trying to fund 100% of their schooling with student loans. Very often they are working in jobs that are paying less, so it's taking a longer time to repay those loans, and the burden is preventing people from starting their life, from purchasing a home, from buying a house, from buying a car, from buying, the things that we see as defining points in one's existence. So student loans are really, a huge burden, and it's something that we should continue to agitate against and continue to push for some sort of respite for students.
Nicole, I'm just going to stay there for just a second, because it's a very interesting conversation that I heard recently on the impact to the economy were we to provide heightened levels of student loan forgiveness. So, people are playing out the economic impacts of people no longer having to pay into a system and banks. And now they're using sort of the two banks that failed as a example of how this could play out. Could you speak to that? Because that bothered me.
Well, I everything you said, Candace, I'm in agreement with. We really have to talk about forgiveness. There are some programs that exist in theory that allow for forgiveness. So there's certain types of degrees, some teachers, some nurses, depending on how, if you've spent a certain amount of time repaying your student loan, it's forgiven. But the proportion of students who get their loan forgiven is just so low that there has to be a policy move towards that to improve student forgiveness. I think we spend a lot of time thinking from our perspective, right? Here's, we need forgiveness, here's why, here are the advantages of it when we remove forgiveness. But part of building a good argument is also to consider your opponent's perspective. And when you hear, some of the against for this, they say, well, it's really subsidizing rich people, right? Because they had a chance to go to school. They're going to be the most highly compensated individuals in the country. And now they don't want to pay back their student loan. It's not the American way. So we have to demonstrate the fact that, some of these rich people are really making $50,000 a year. And, it's stopping them from moving forward in life. It's stopping them from really achieving long-term goals. So we really, in developing our story as to why this is important, our narrative, we also need to be able to chisel away at the counter narrative and agitate for more forgiveness and more free college for people who are going to start in the near future.
That was good, Candace. I like that follow-up. Lincoln is asking, he said, according to what I experienced at the work setting at some different public schools, some professionals, even in the same school, do not have the same views on college application. Thus, many students are confused and tend to listen to whoever makes them feel better. I don't think this is wrong because students need emotional support, but for the matter of a long-term benefit and objective standpoints, how should we be addressing the whole issue of whether college is worth it?
I think any real evidence we look in the long run tells you that college is worth it in the long run. We can spend time talking about how much you could potentially earn over time with your bachelor's degree compared to a high school diploma. We can spend time talking about unemployment rates, looking at the relative unemployment rates between people who have a bachelor's degree compared to those that don't. So there's a large number of resources that point to the value of a college degree. And in fact, it's almost disingenuous for those who talk about a college isn't worth it. I love looking at some of the examples of people who say, oh, college isn't worth it, as they, with their bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, talk about, and all their children are enrolled in bachelor's and master's degrees program. I think sometimes the subtext there is a college isn't worth it for you. And I'm really worried about, what storyline, what agenda they're pushing by getting us to believe that, this thing that everyone else has that is moving you forward is not good enough for certain students. So I think what we should be doing is trying to figure out which degree is worth it for us, because everyone is different. Everyone has a different interest. Everyone has different values. Everyone has, different thoughts as to where they end up. And, you don't necessarily all have to be engineers. I mean, who wants to do the certificate, who wants to do the certification, who wants to move into healthcare. We just have to really spend time counseling and advising our students about the career pathways that will give them into the job that, gives them satisfaction, and not necessarily don't get a degree and 10 years from now, you're worse off than anyone else.
I think that's the new way of saying what was told to me. You're not college material.
Yeah.
That's the new way of phrasing it, I think.
Always look at the background. Always like, oh, so you have a degree. Do your kids have a degree? And it's always yes. So it's just
right. Exactly. Where can we find, Candace is asking, where can we find more information on industries and their view on credentials?
I don't know if I can find the industry view on credentials, but I do have some credentials by industry credentials that are in high demand. And we have some of that on our website. We talk about, what are these industry level credentials that are high demand. We define high demand by, scrapings of internet postings and job postings, and which ones keep showing up over and over again. We sort of scoop them up and say, here's the list.
I just want to,
Okay.
I'm famous for follow-up. So, sorry, Nicole. I mean, sorry, Nancy, I didn't mean to cut across you, but
No, that's good.
here's the issue, Nicole, that I'm trying to get to. We, even in training college attainment, college access professionals, we're spouting off all the time, get a college degree because that's how you're going to get a job. All the good jobs require college degrees. However people are phrasing it, it's still there, right? It's our biggest mantra for how we encourage young people to apply and go to college. My concern is that most professionals can't back that up with where that's really happening, and is that happening, and what industries that's happening, what industries are are needing those credentials. Now, everybody can spout off probably the top three, you know, more in doctor, lawyer, and that kind of thing. But I'm concerned because we don't have access to the data of what are the industries actually saying, right? What are they
Well,
saying?
I don't have the industries, but I have the occupations. So, and the
Right,
occupations, you know, are much more closely related to the education requirements within the industry. But we do have a report called What's It Worth, where we line up all of these occupations. And we look at occupations, we do it within industries, we do it by gender, we do it by race.
perfect.
So again, you can go to the website and you can see exactly what's it worth. And we tell you what each of these in 5 years, 10 years, and 40 years. I think the 40 year is an estimate, but the 5 year and the 10 year is actually real data. You know, from our sources that tell you what people have earned and what people continue to earn with these degrees.
That's golden. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. James is asking how do HBCUs perform as a whole based on your study? Because HBCUs still vastly supply the amount of Black professionals in the workforce.
HBCUs as a whole have been excellent. You know, especially when we talk about equity and diversity and inclusion and making sure that we include, or you know, we increase the number of people of color with certain types of majors or certain types of degrees. I think where we have concerns is that we think that a lot of students who are attending HBCUs do have an opportunity to attend more highly resourced schools than some of the HBCUs based on their test score. And there's lots of cultural benefits to going, but we just want to talk about, you know, making sure that everyone goes to the best school that they are positioned for and not necessarily undershooting their potential. Janet says ONET has a lot of information on credentials by industry. Most of the data we do on industry is from ONET, Janet.
We've got some talk in here now on the best use of describing the need for student loans. So Ellen was asking, curious, how practitioners talk to students, families, and school-based colleagues when asked, are loans worth it? Is college worth it? So what's the go-to wording? So I encourage all the folks in the room to actually respond to that. I think that that's an excellent conversation. I don't know, Nicole, if you have any thoughts on that, but I certainly
Nothing
encourage the practitioners.
Yeah, nothing that hasn't been said. I mean, is college worth it? Is the loan worth it? It's all related to a combination of things. It's your lifetime earnings, your potential lifetime earnings. It is all of the things that were said in the chat about the non-pecuniary benefits to healthcare, to incarceration, to civic engagement. It's the benefit to longevity in jobs, and you know, and your ability to stay in a job, unemployment rates, lower unemployment rates. So the conversation really has many layers for the benefits of education.
I'm seeing Lincoln also shared it, maybe in response to something earlier too, but I'm just going to read this and get some response from you. And please, those of you who are in the room, also weigh in. But the issue here, he says, the issue here, I think, could be whether those who actually have moved away from this environment would want to come back and talk about talk at all. I know the top one student at a school, he did nearly perfect on all tests that are not required at all at his school and studying on himself. and tutors. So I think this is addressing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is addressing the conversation that's going on in the chat about standardized testing. That's a whole nother topic that we could. Gloria is saying, my conversations around the value of a college education focus on a student's future, having as many options as possible.
I agree with Gloria, and Maritza was asking where to find What's It Worth Working on My Fields. Go to cew.georgetown.edu and just type in What's It Worth in the search bar. Or maybe even a Google search will get you. Google CW What's It Worth.
Yeah, I think it might. We will also drop that back in the chat for anybody who joined more recently. They may not see it in the chat.
Thanks, Phoenix. I see that you dropped the link in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I think we are probably at the point of winding down now. Get your last questions and thoughts in, please. We're going to maybe give it another 5 minutes at the most. Some folks are starting to actually leave the meeting now. I know it's that 10 o'clock hour and folks are moving on with their day. We are not stopping the meeting. As Candace said earlier, we will have announcements from the community on what's happening around the area and outside the area. But let's try to wind up both the online, in the chat conversations, conclusions, so forth, as well as any last questions you want to get before we say adieu to Nicole for the day.
Oh, I like this comment in the chat that Ahmed made. I often describe a college degree as a driver's license when speaking with students. Can you get around without one? Yes. Does driving and having a license also come with challenges? Yes. It's a personal decision on how you prefer to navigate the world of work. Ultimately, you should never pay more than your starting salary when it comes to loans. Oh, don't we wish we could do that? Don't we wish we could do that? I did a happy dance.
I think it's a good rule of thumb. I think it's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Good enough rule of thumb. Yeah. Especially when you're talking about people who take out large loans, like lawyers and the doctors. I'm
going to steal that. I'm going to steal that driver's license concept. That's a good one. It's a good
I like
one.
that. Sigus is, I'm sorry, Shamik is responding to something that Sigus put in there too. And I love, he said, college access is the wild, wild west. It is, it's hard to keep up with. Very good. All right, I think we've got some really great conversation in the chat, but I don't necessarily see any pressing questions. Last chance for your pressing questions. I don't know, good recipes, new jokes. So let me take this opportunity while people are having some good conversation in the chat to thank from the bottom of our hearts, Nicole Smith. This is probably one of my favorite sessions that we've had, but my pre-meeting with you, I already knew that that was going to happen. Such good information, and to be continued, because I think we may have to address this in future years as your research continues and grows. And then we see new things that we don't even know about yet that, you know, impact this work. So I appreciate you. And folks, we are working, we're going to continue to pay attention to Nicole and the CEW's research and fold that into College Prep Roundtable in a broader way. And the first way that we're going to do some of that is we're going to continue the conversation and do Is College Worth It Part 2. And we're going to have a local slant to it, some research that's coming out locally. So please hold on your calendars and note that Thursday, June 15th will be our our next meeting, and it will be hybrid. So the June 15th meeting will be, you know what hybrid is at this point, part online, part in person, and we are being hosted by Arcadia University, which you should, most of you probably know is right outside Philadelphia. And part two is to broaden this conversation, but as I mentioned, to bring it locally. So we will have the local slant. We'll also have some additional breakout sessions where we can continue the conversation. So stay tuned for that. Right now, that I believe, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that is still scheduled from a 9 to 11 time period, maybe slightly longer than 11.